Okay, thank you very much for joining. I'm going to call the second meeting of the Audit Committee to order. I think we have all the members of the committee. Thank you very much for being on time, and a number of staff and both the internal and external auditors here. First, I just want to read a statement about accessibility. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. I will look to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest from the members of the committee. I don't see any on the folks on the screen. Ms. Higgs, if there's something you'd like to declare, unmute yourself.
Nothing to declare. I'm just having video troubles, so I may be a black box today.
No problem. Okay, let's move on to the items on the agenda. The first one is 4.1, as there are no consent items or scheduled items. 4.1 is the internal and external audit services. This is contract extensions. You have the report from staff in front of you. There is a motion that's been recommended. I want to see if there's a mover for that, a seconder. Okay, let's have some discussion. Perhaps we can go to Ms. Barbone first to just explain what is going on in this recommendation.
Yes, thank you through the chair. So as you will recall at our last audit committee meeting, we had great intentions of moving forward and provided a report that we would be moving to an RFP for this year. And no sooner had council approved it, were we actually in the middle of a pandemic, and a large number of our resources and services have came to an abrupt halt. So as a result, we have had to go back with a number of changes, and currently the delay that we're working through still our financial statement, external audit, to look at the workload and what we would typically be able to accomplish this year. So what we are proposing that under the circumstances, given that it is not a good time to proceed to try to move to an internal audit RFP this year, that in order to juggle everything and to put us in the same position that we would otherwise have intended to be, with only one RFP going forward at a time, would be to extend. We certainly have within our internal audit contract the extension that we can move to do. And as part of that, so that we're not moving forward to do internal audit and external audit next year, we're recommending that we move forward the external audit RFP. And we're looking for actually a 2-year extension, just so that it will give us some continuity with the particular changes that are coming forward with respect to the accounting standard changes that will be coming forward. So that is the one consideration, that by bumping everything out into the future, we were looking for an extra year just to allow us to have some continuity as we implement the new standards, because there is some assistance that we would be looking to proactively move forward with the changes with the external auditors as we embark upon those changes, which certainly will assist us in making sure that whatever changes the city implements are acceptable and thought through well in advance. So that is why we're moving everything forward essentially a year, to allow the staff the time to plan for it adequately, given the significant strain on the resources at this current time.
Thank you very much. I'll just look for speakers in terms of questions or comments on the idea. I see Councillor Van Holst. I see Ms. Higgs next. Anyone else? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, through you. This makes so much sense. I'm embarrassed I didn't think of it myself. Well done. I think it's using that that section in the procurement policy to allow us to still retain that gap will be very helpful, because as we knew, trying to do both of those at the same time, both of those appointments at the same time is a challenge, and this will get us out of that problem, as well as the difficulties we're in right now. So this is a great suggestion. Happy to move this forward.
Ms. Higgs, go ahead.
Through the chair, I guess my comments here, I would fully support deferring going to RFP for the internal audit as well as external audit as stated. I guess just a few comments or questions before proceeding with an extension. I think it would be good practice for the committee with the input of management to have discussion as to the level of satisfaction with internal audit to make sure that we're satisfied to continue and support an extension. And if we are supportive of that approach, then I guess I'd have a question back through for management around, would the recommendation be to extend for a full year at the existing scope? And I ask that question because I think given the current circumstances, there may be limited capacity within the city to even support a full scope extension, or whether we would be looking to extend for a partially or reduced scope. And then a third question would be, again, depending on capacity of the city and the other priorities that may be emerging due to COVID, would we consider a year of no internal audit function at all? So I just put those questions forward for consideration.
Thank you very much. I'll go to Ms. Barbone for some comments in response to those questions. And Ms. Higgs, if you could lower your hand, that way I'll know when you raise it again. Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. Those are very good questions. So with respect to the Deloitte contract, the way the existing contract is written allows for a full 1-year extension. The terms and conditions as part of the contract are that the amount of work that Deloitte does is billed up to the fee that is there. So currently, where there is limited work being done at this time because we were trying to get through this last couple of months, there's been, and you'll see that reflected in their update, that there's been a few things that have been delayed because we just don't have the capacity to move it forward, and some of the projects just are not proceeding at this time. But certainly within the contract, while that delay is happening, Deloitte will bill us up to the actuals as they incur the cost up to the amount that is per the contract. So certainly I'm in the committee's hands as to what your direction would be. I believe Deloitte certainly has their internal audit plan as approved by the committee, but certainly that is within the committee's prerogative to amend the plan, defer projects as might be seen as prudent, and potentially take a longer hiatus if that was felt that would be a way to also achieve cost savings from not moving forward with a couple of months of additional engagement. So what that would do is you could either push the plan forward as is, you could amend it and take things off, or you could replace accordingly. So that certainly is within the committee's prerogative to do what you see as best.
And on the two other questions in terms of management's satisfaction with internal audit performance and whether you could go ahead with no internal audit, those are the other two questions that Ms. Higgs had raised.
So I think through the chair, with respect to the performance, right into the contract, there are some metrics that are specifically included in the contract with respect to performance. Certainly management at this point does not see any issue to proceed and extend it. It's certainly an important part of that as well would be the committee's input if there was other issues that the committee might be aware of or wish to discuss. That would certainly be an issue that the committee may have input into, but from management's perspective at this point, there is nothing that, as the performance is outlined in the contract itself, that is clearly not being met that would pose a great concern to extend it any further.
And just that last question about the advisability of going ahead with no internal audit for part of the year or a full year.
So through the chair, I think that certainly would be a decision that the internal audit committee would wish to make. I think from our perspective, we certainly, I think for the last couple of months since March, haven't had the capacity to have a great deal of input and move and start new projects at this time because management's been consumed very much with, and there's been a number of projects that have been placed on hold that are currently within the audit plan just because of our inability with the level of staffing that we have to proceed, and we're focused on the vital service delivery that we're currently doing. So I think from our perspective, we are on hold at this point in time. I think it'd be challenging at today to be able to tell you when we think we'd be able to resume, but I think it depends also to the extent that the committee would want to fulfill everything that's there, or if there are certain projects that you believe could wait in terms of from a governance perspective. So I think certainly we would be grateful for a break. I don't know that I can tell you today exactly how long that's going to be necessary, given the level of services that we're trying to provide. And we could certainly leave that open to the committee if you felt that there was a need to continue certain things. I think that's within your prerogative to decide.
Thank you. I see Councillor Turner next, and I'm going to come to you in a moment. And I will just say the very next item on our agenda is a discussion around internal audit and progress there. So we could potentially have part of this discussion on the second item. I would like to keep the discussion here to the issue around the extensions, which is what is sort of before us right now. So Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would agree. I think the questions Ms. Higgs raises are very insightful and helpful, and I recognize the branch between this item and the next item. The point Ms. Barbone raises about that the contract that we have is up to a certain amount of work, and if that work can't be performed, it's billed against the work that is performed. So that's helpful and gives us the latitude. I think with respect to a satisfaction to the work, I think that's a pertinent question to this item here, and I would say I've been satisfied with the work of both. And they've been providing good products and have been providing us good information as we've been going forward. The adherence to the work plan has been appropriate up until now. Where we find ourselves somewhat derailed a little bit, and we get to discuss that part in the next section here. So I'm supportive of the extensions. I actually had a bit of apprehension when we decided we were going to curtail the extensions, because I was pretty happy with the work that was being provided for us, and I thought if we could maintain that relationship for as long as we could before having to go back out to tender, that might be advantageous to us. Yeah, I will certainly support the recommendation being put forward here, and I look forward to the discussion on the next item.
Any other speakers? I see Councillor Cassidy has joined us. Councillor Cassidy, just raise your hand if you're looking to weigh in. Okay, if not, let's go to voting. We will be voting in order. I'm going to start with Ms. Higgs. So I guess if you can just unmute and say whether you're in favor or not.
I support the motion. Yep.
Okay. Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
And I'm in favor. So that motion carries unanimously. Let's move on to the second item, which is the internal audit summary report. I think I'm going to go to either Anissa or Jem to introduce it, and then we'll get into questions. Go ahead. I think probably it's Anissa.
Yes, and then I'll pass it over to Jem. So the internal audit update, very similar to the conversation that has been occurring, is that the projects have been delayed given the circumstances. So what the plan is that internal audit would like to move forward with is that we reevaluate the projects and the timing with management when appropriate, and reevaluate if the current projects within the plan should move forward, or given the current situation, some internal audit plans across different industries have changed their projects as well, just depending on the areas that have been impacted in the organizations and the risks that are relevant. So what we've provided you within the package is just a general document that looks at some specific areas that other organizations have looked at when it has come to changing projects within the plan. Areas that are of concern across the board for many organizations are looking at things such as digital security, cyber, as well as what it looks like from a return to work perspective, working remotely, and also just around incident response monitoring as well. So if it were an appropriate, internal audit would spend time with management to reevaluate the projects that are in the current plan. The one project that we have been able to continuously move forward on has been Service London, as we were able to complete our field work prior to the shutdowns in March. So we're just working with management to finalize management comments, and that report should be issued within a few weeks. I'll pass it over to Jim to provide an update on the internal audit summary of high and medium observations.
Just before we go to Jim, and Anissa, could you mention the last little bit? I missed the last part of what you said, which is when the management comments are going to be finalized and the report issued, the timeline.
Sure. So actually this morning I received management comments. So I would say within about 2 weeks, the report should be finalized.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jim.
Hi there. Thank you. Yeah, if you'll turn to page, sorry, your deck, it would be page 11, is just the summary of the findings. There really is no change from the last report, and the reason for that is that with COVID, we decided not to update, in discussions with management, decided not to go through the effort of updating that. So right now, this report is relatively static. We've updated the dates and that sort of thing. So you'll see some that are overdue that we have not connected with management to confirm the timing. I do know in talking to one example was the with Scott Oldham and Parks and Rec. They were able to close their comment around the class replacement, but we've not been able to verify that yet. So that remains as past due in that report, which is not reflected in the report. So that's the summary of our internal audit activities since the last internal audit meeting, or audit committee meeting. I guess at this point, we just turn it to questions from the committee.
Thanks very much. We'll look to see committee members. Ms. Higgs, I'm not sure if that's from voting earlier. Okay, it is. Any questions or comments about the internal audit summary report, having heard from the internal auditors? Councillor Turner, and then I'll come to Councillor Van Holst. Go ahead.
Sorry, I thought Councillor Van Holst had his hand up before me, but I think my question with this is, and I really appreciate the report because it identifies especially those risk areas and key areas to consider, and I think they're really well thought out. The challenge is there are so many, and one of the principles that we wanted when we set out to contract services for these audits was to be able to pivot if we needed to, where areas of specific or special interest arose to the corporation and to the city. In this circumstance, I think the movement into kind of the business continuity operations and the movement into kind of COVID type operations right now and reduced or limited or changed poses a lot of potential risks to the corporation. And I would be really interested, I'm a little worried about going another quarter before we determine what we would want to take a look at. I think there needs to be some sort of audit activity that identifies those highest risk areas and focuses in on those in the interim. Because I do have concerns about those things, especially even on something like the cyber or the user access controls, where people are working remotely. Perhaps they're using unscanned devices or alternate platforms that might create a security risk into the corporation, especially if they're using access controls that are important to me to be able to maintain and keep locked down. But there might other be some cost controls. The biggest challenge right now is knowing that there's a lot of work that just has to be done. And so we do it, but we have no real concept of how much we're actually spending in certain areas, or how we can have cost containment or cost mitigations. So I'm not sure. Perhaps there's a question coming out of that through you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps to Ms. Barbone. to say what might be the next offering, I guess, to our committee in terms of what a focus might be in some of those key areas, and when we might next reconvene to be able to provide that tasking.
So through the chair, I think from a senior management perspective, we have not had a discussion with Deloitte with respect to the revision of the audit plan. What I can tell you from a civic administration perspective is that, you know, a number of these risks are things that we are dealing with each and every day, and we have not deviated at all from our basic practices of control, segregation of duties, risk management. I mean, all of those practices, including our return to works, everything has been done using the same corporate standards that we have done previously. So, so as not to introduce additional risk into the workplace. So I think as we've developed our plans to reintroduce services and everything, we go through a number of lenses to make sure that we are utilizing the same processes and that we are not cutting corners in any way to impact segregation of duties or increase the risk. So from a number of, you know, we've done a number of things in terms of as we look through to make sure that these are embedded in all the decisions that we make, and a lot of them impact multiple areas, I would say, from the different lenses that we bring things forward. You know, a health and safety perspective, I mean, we have had Ministry of Labor visit us quite frequently, so we know as we're going forward that our practices are ensuring that our employees are safe, and we have a number of new standard operating guidelines that are being introduced on a daily basis as things change to address things as we put forward from a number of different lenses when we go forward. So certainly from I think from our path anyways, is that the next conversation would be with Deloitte, where they come forward and we have a discussion to review the risks and look at recommending from our perspective what we see the particularly significant risks might be, and if there's a need to amend the plan, and then they would pull all that together and also seek audit committee's advice to bring forward a revised plan. So, you know, certainly from a financial perspective, we have not deviated from the controls that we use. We are currently undergoing our external audit right now, where they are evaluating our internal controls. We will have a great deal next year as well that will come forward, because of course they're auditing what happened in 2019, but 2020 will be what they look at going forward. And we've got many guidelines that we've issued to maintain very similar practices and ensure we haven't deviated. So I think from our perspective, we would work with Deloitte to amend the audit plan that they would bring forward to recommend to audit committee any potential changes and what that would mean. And certainly as we move forward, it would be within budget, but from a cost containment perspective, that we have been reporting regularly on what the impacts are, and we certainly do not have the level of staff that we would normally have, and a number of things, as we've communicated in numerous reports to committees and council, are currently not happening because we have had to make choices accordingly, and we're looking obviously for council endorsement of those choices, through a number of which were reported to the SPPC committee last night.
Thank you, Ms. Barbone. I think the financial controls are probably the lower the concerns, because I think those are well established and probably more ingrained. It tends to be a little bit more of the process controls and perhaps some of the legislative or liability areas that might be ones that might get a little lost in the shuffle in the switch, the quick pivot to kind of an emergency operations footing. Perhaps a question through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Rufedin, about the list that's prepared here in our report. Is that a list that's a little more generic to just generally in corporate environments, or are these raised from specific observations within the Corporation of the City of London, or if not, are there ones that are specifically of high concern to our auditors that we might want to focus in on over the coming months?
Ms. Rufedin.
Yes. So to answer the question, it is more of a generic emerging risk that from a general perspective, internal audit is looking at across different organizations and industries. The areas of concern or more of higher risk within many organizations at the moment are more on the IT side. So I'm going to allow Jim to speak to those aspects, looking at cyber and the data and security pieces.
Go ahead, Mr. Price.
Hi there. Yeah, and I think the thing to add there is that there's nothing that we're aware of at the city currently in that list that would be higher or lower because of COVID, but they're just general areas that we might want to consider. And certainly we look to management to add their flavor and understanding of the environment to know if there's certain areas that are higher risk. We are seeing that from a cyber perspective and security perspective in IT, what's happening in a lot of organizations is that what they sometimes refer to as the attack surface has increased, because you used to have the city with a firewall and a certain number of people working remotely. You change that to high percentage of the workforce working remotely, it does increase the risk, and I think you alluded to that in your question. And that's something that I don't know that we've looked in detail in the past at that, but that if you look at projects, that could be one that would be looked at, would be just what is the risk and how is the city manage that risk given the changes and just how the landscape has changed for the city from a security perspective.
Thank you. And perhaps just one more question. Does this warrant, in terms of the audit plan as it stands, versus anything that might be emerging that might require some specific attention in a timely manner? I'd imagine our audit plan has to be amended in some way, but are there things that we imminently need to add, or are there things that can be done on a bit more of a micro scale, kind of like quick looks, or are we just good to just kind of pare down our audit plan and change the implementation schedule?
Councillor Turner, are you looking for comments from the internal auditors on that, management, or your fellow committee members?
I would look to the internal auditors in this case to see what their recommendations might be.
Go ahead.
I can respond if you want. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think that those are all good questions, and I think that's something that we would work with management and the committee to understand. I guess the world has changed, of course. The initial plan that we put together was put together in a different set of risks. Looking at what aspects of the current plan need to be retained and are still important, in balancing with some of the areas that have increased in risk, and then looking at the budget overall. I think that's another important aspect, is that there's a high likelihood that you wouldn't go to the full budget and use this as an area to maybe save some cost. So looking at maybe doing some leaner risk assessments with identification of controls versus full testing and that sort of thing to report back to the audit committee could be a way to get, I think you termed it like quick hits or quick reviews, to really get an understanding of what the risk areas are. I'm not aware currently of any areas that would be urgent, just to respond to that piece of it, but management may have a different perspective just because they're closer to the day-to-day operations.
Very good. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Van Holst, and I will ask that we try and keep questions and answers as concise as possible, because I think there's probably a lot of people who want to weigh in on this particular topic, and I want to make sure we get to everybody relatively quickly in the discussion. Go ahead, Councillor Van Holst.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm grateful for the emerging risk areas for internal audit to consider. That section on page 8 through 10, and I thought I might ask a few of these questions just at a really high level, and also maybe confirm some of the things I don't really consider to be a big risk for us, to make sure that's the case. But so if I can proceed, I'm not looking for long answers at all, but through you to our staff, as a concern here for maintaining an audit trail, and in the face of people working at home, which is, I think, a little more new for us at the city. Perhaps I could get a comment on that. Do we have any concern there?
So through the chair, I'm not sure what exactly are you referring to, if I might ask, from an audit trail with respect to working remote? I'm not sure if there's a specific question there you're looking for.
Well, I guess for instance, your department, are there things that might influence that? Have we changed the workflow so that might become an issue? I don't imagine it would, but I'm just.
I'm just gonna intervene for a second, Councillor Van Holst. So Ms. Barbone, Councillor Van Holst is referring to the user access controls section in the table of emerging risks that Deloitte has put forward. There's a section in there that talks about monitoring controls being in place, and essentially maintaining an audit trail, even if you're changing segregation of duties, for example, as people are working from home and making other changes in terms of operations. So I think he's asking about, have you had any issues with maintaining an audit trail with all the changes that have happened with COVID? I think that is the question.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor, Mr. Chair. I was just going to ask a few things starting from the top. I didn't really point that out, so I appreciate the clarification.
Through the chair, thank you. That was helpful. I was trying to locate exactly which one you were looking for. So with respect to user controls, so the way the corporation is handled remote at work, we have provided laptops in a number of cases so that where people are working remotely, they're using laptops. So the segregation of duties has not changed. Where they might get access to something different, we are following the exact same process where a manager has to approve and it goes through IT and systems are granted access. So we have not done anything differently than what we would have previously done with respect to segregation of duties. So the trail for the approval process and for all of the access controls, those are all still in place and fully documented that are there, and all the approvals are still required for anyone to receive any of the access that they would have previously requested before. So that has not changed.
Okay, thank you. If may I would proceed if that's fine, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we don't replicate all of the work that an internal audit function would replicate here today at our audit committee. So go ahead with your questions. I just want to make sure that they're quick and high level, and that the answers are also that way, because we certainly haven't done the work of the internal audit to be able to answer some of these questions that have been identified as emerging risks at this point. So go ahead.
Right. So in the finance suggestion section, it talked about challenging the completeness of managements, and I'll talk about the impact analysis there. Of course, we've got a pretty detailed impact analysis. However, I don't know that there's a great risk if it's off. For some organizations, getting that wrong might be a large problem, but I don't think for us that's going to be a risk. It's going to be what it is, and we're going to have to deal with it. But the not getting it perfect won't be a problem. May I could ask for through you for staff to if they consider that have the same opinion.
Thank you through the chair. The simple answer is that we are monitoring very, very closely what the impact is going to be, and we're trying to provide council with very fulsome updates on a regular basis to show what the anticipated impact is. I would suggest, given the impact that we have, this is something critical that we have been looking to monitor the impacts of regularly, because as a result of any changes of the financial cost, we are trying to keep ahead of it so that we don't create a significant hole and don't become aware of it until the end of the year, where there's very limited time to react. So this is something that we have been looking at very closely, and that we require a great deal of support across the corporation to look at the businesses that we deliver, what changes are occurring, to be able to estimate what those costs are going to be. So we've been providing regular reports to council and committee, and we continue to expect to do so in terms of keeping council up to date as to what the information is we have.
Okay, thank you. And I see that work. It's great. On the cyber risk, the last question there talks about monitoring some of the new collaboration tools. And I see how we're doing this with Zoom. And I wondered through you, Mr. Chair, to staff, are there many other new tools that are being made use of in other parts of the organization?
Through the chair, so I'm speaking on behalf of Mr. Daly. So this is, I'm sure he would have been able to provide a more fulsome report, but essentially Zoom has been the corporate standard that we're utilizing, obviously, for council and the committee meetings. The only other tool that we have introduced is Microsoft Teams, which is part of the Microsoft suite that we already utilize, which has been primarily for staff internal and is linked to our Outlook system that we use. Those are primarily the two tools that we're utilizing, in addition to all of the tools that were previously available to us and endorsed by our IT and cybersecurity team.
Okay, thank you. And then the very last question on page 10 talks about HR processes and performance assessments and things like that. It's an interesting point, having for managers who are used to having people very close to them. Now they're all away. Do we think that's going to require much new work?
I just wanted to say, obviously, Ms. Barbona's the treasurer and the managing director in finance. We're not expecting you to have visibility into every aspect of the corporation's operations, but at a high level, if you want to comment on the human resources piece.
Thank you through the chair. So what I would say from my perspective, and in working closely, the HR has been very active in terms of supporting the corporation with respect to all of our HR processes and trying to guide us through what steps need to be taken care of. So I think certainly we're still trying to maintain as much discussion with our employees through regular channels, albeit not in person, but we still continue a lot of the processes that are there. And obviously the remote level of the work has changed it, but everybody is in, I would say, more regular contact with one another through Zoom and ensuring that we have the collaboration to move forward with whatever decisions are being made corporately. So I think certainly that's all that I would be able to add, and without speaking on behalf of HR.
Okay, well, thank you. And Mr. Chair, those are my questions. I'm happy to move this item for receipt if that hasn't been done already.
I'm just going to look to see if there's any other comments about the internal audit plan. Councillor Turner raised the issue around whether we want to have some direction to have a discussion about amending it. Certainly, I will just say from the chair, as I'm not seeing any other hands up, I'm perfectly willing to have another meeting of the audit committee to deal with amendments if those are necessary. I think there have been rather substantial changes in how the corporation's operating, even just when you think about remote work and the changes that have had to happen there. And potentially the risk profile of these things has changed. So I think it would be appropriate to kind of look at that and see if there are any changes that need to be made. And we have the option of either waiting till our next regularly scheduled meeting or having a second meeting before then. And so I just put that on the table as if we wanted to have a direction to have internal audit and management discuss how they like to proceed on that. And then we could have them report back slightly earlier than would otherwise be the case to a special meeting call for that purpose. That would be how I could see it proceeding from this point. I looked at committee members to see if, in addition to receiving this report, that's something that you want to do. I see Ms. Higgs, and then I'm going to come to Councillor Turner. Ms. Higgs.
Thank you. So just my thoughts on that. I would appreciate some follow-up meeting with a revised audit plan. I think that would be good. The question I would have through to management is, given the external audit is happening right now, what are the timelines that might be realistic and achievable to recalibrate not only the current year plan, but perhaps also bring back a recommendation on what 2020 might look like. And so in that, I recall we did have a draft 3-year plan that forecasted out the planned projects for not only this year, but also the next year. So could we look at the sum total of all the projects that were planned, also listing in any new emerging risks or priorities, and then have a recommendation of all of those potential projects, what we might do for the remainder of this calendar year, as well as then approve into next year.
Ms. Barbone.
So, and just to clarify, I believe I understood that you're looking for a revision that we would work with Deloitte to come back to have a new plan that would be presented by Deloitte to you that would go right till the end of next year. Is that correct?
I'm wondering if it would be appropriate to parcel them both together, to recast the current year and then forecast into next year, given that the committee is supporting an extension.
Certainly through the chair, I think from our perspective, that would be reasonable. I'm not sure that without talking to Ms. Livingston that we would be able to commit to exactly what that time frame is. Certainly we're in the midst of a significant decrease in our staff right now, and we're trying to work through all of the changes that are going forward at this time with our facilities. That would take us through a great deal of reopenings with our daycares and a number of other things. But certainly between now and council, Ms. Livingston and I can have a discussion to look at what that time frame might be that we could bring forward to council next week.
Ms. Higgs, any other questions, comments?
No, none for me. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think those are good comments there. And if we could at least have some contemplation of what that might look like. Time frame as well. I'm totally recognizing what the administration is going through right now. And I think providing the latitude to at least propose to us what might be reasonable, feasible, and achievable, that would help us and help, I think, to be able to make sure that the audit plan reflects what we can actually do, and again recognizes the capacity of what the administration can do to support those audits in the interim.
Well, one thing I would say is we don't have to have the timing figured out necessarily in the direction. We could have a general direction, which is to have management and the internal auditors work on a revised plan for 2020 and 2021. And then as the chair, I could certainly call a meeting to deal with that earlier than otherwise would have been the case. We can figure that out, the timing. I don't think anyone's expecting it to be 2 weeks from now. So I think it's out in the future. It's just when out in the future. And we don't have to be specific at this point.
Yeah, and I'd be willing to make that motion.
Okay, so Councillor Van Holst was looking to move the recommendation to receive. Maybe if he's amenable to this kind of direction as well, we could have you be the seconder. Councillor Van Holst, are you okay with that?
I'm happy to second that.
Okay, so we'll have you as the mover and Councillor Turner as the seconder of this melded motion. Anyone else want to weigh in on this idea? Councillor Morgan, go ahead.
Yes. So I think that where we've landed is quite responsible. I like the idea of not establishing a timeline. I think we all recognize the situation we're in is unprecedented. It's not something we could have possibly prepared for. We have a number of different operations running in ways that they've never run before, and controls and processes running in ways that they've never run before. And the return to normal is going to be hard to predict. So I think being strategic about how we use our audit resources in either assessing how we did on those things, or looking forward into the support for operations and whatever they're going to look like moving forward under whatever timeframes they're going to is important, but also will require a lot of flexibility, and I think we're well positioned with that. And I think management working with our internal auditors to bring something back to the committee is the right approach. I'm going to be very open to what's going to be brought back given our current circumstances, and I'll look forward to discussing it at that time.
Thank you very much. Any other comments on the motion which is in front of us, which is to receive the report and then also direct management and civic administration and the internal auditors to come back with a revised plan to a future audit committee meeting? Seeing none, we'll move to voting. I'm going to start with Ms. Higgs.
Yes, I support.
Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
And I'm in favor. The motion carries unanimously. Any additional business? Councillor Morgan.
I just wouldn't let the meeting go by without saying happy 40th birthday to the chair. I know that this is probably not the funnest way that you could enjoy your birthday, but we appreciate your dedication and being here today. And of course, I'll wish you celebration and welcome to the club of the 40s too. So it's a great time to be alive.
Thank you very much. We won't repeat the Minions video that Deputy Mayor Hubert put on during an audit committee meeting one year. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Let's have a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. All those in favor?
Yes.
Okay, that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.